So, welcome to another episode of Pomelo Pitch Deck. We're here with Chuck MacDonald to dive into the Eden proposal. It's had some interesting conversations a little bit before the show about everybody being in everybody else's business, which I think is quite interesting because Eden does, in a way, present an opportunity for people to come and get involved in governance and plug that in. And I think that that's something that we haven't really tapped into as a society. People vote, but they're not active. They don't always necessarily have a voice. They campaign for other people, but they don't necessarily get to shape the things in the way that we do when we work through a process like Eden. So I would imagine a lot of people know what it is, Chuck, but do you want to just maybe give a kind of brief outline of what Eden is and why it matters, and then maybe we can dive into the proposal?
Yeah, sure, Jimmy. Well, it's based on a book by Dan Larimer called More Equal Animals, and he's been experimenting with a few things for a little while, and I've read the book, I don't know, maybe about 15 times in total, literally reading it over and over and over again. And the premise is basically we have to build a new electoral system because our current system is captured, and there are certain hazards in our system that are they're all over the place. So it's captured in the sense that political parties are established. They can nominate their own candidates, and their nomination process is opaque. It's not a public thing. So a political party can say that they're an open party. They can be transparent in certain ways, but their nomination process is fairly locked down. Like, nobody gets nominated in a major party without literally towing the party line. You can't be an independent thinker unless you really go out and do a lot of work. And then even then, we saw I got engaged in U.S. politics anyway. We're just talking about both being Canadians, and I got engaged in U.S. politics in 2008 watching Ron Paul. And actually, my Twitter handle is ignore Ron Paul. And please don't ignore Ron Paul, right? That's just a joke. But I got engaged in U.S. politics watching him, and I saw how popular he was getting, and I saw he was completely ignored by his party. Right, his party mocked him. He was a toxic element as far as they were concerned, and they thought they would never get anywhere using his platform or using anything that had to do with anyway. He ran again in 2012, was even more popular, but still lower results in numbers, because the party was captured, right? There was no way for somebody like him to break through and get the nomination, no matter how well he did in the primaries. And eventually they just shut the primaries down and just said, we're done, because they had to go through all these things to eliminate him from contention. And now it's blowback. Now the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction, and the Republican Party is sorry, I'm getting into politics here ahead of everything. It's just a preface, because everything's been captured now, and now we're in the cycle where it's a response to all that capture. So now nobody trusts politics anymore. Nobody trusts politics on either side in the U.S. And it's nobody has any sense that their vote is real, or that it means anything, or that anything they do is going to do anything of value. So what Dan wrote is an experiment. Basically, it's a social experiment in using technology, using the smart contracts that we have in EOS and in other blockchains, but particularly EOS, to write a system where people can be automatically broken apart into groups, randomized into groups. So you get a bunch of people together with a common goal, common idea, and then you randomize them into small groups. They each have a small group discussion, and then at the end of, say, an hour or so, they've arrived at consensus on who the single person is in that small group that should go forward to the next round, right? So you get a playoff bracket, basically. So you start off with a bunch of small groups, and then one winner goes forward to the next bracket, and then they have another discussion. And the best person from that, or not the best person, but the person who is chosen by that group to be the consensus nominee from that group, goes forward to the next level. And then by the end of it, you've got a final table, as you could say, like in a poker tournament, you've got a final table that's comprised of some fairly capable people, right? Because they've all been agreed upon by everybody who came before them. And then they can also take all of the arguments and all the ideas that those people before them had, and they can bring them forward and sort of represent them. So it's a good representative system for politics. Anyway, the book, long story, even longer, the book goes into how to do this and all the benefits of a society that might be built upon this political model. And it's a very hopeful thing, right? And what we're hoping to achieve. Anyway, this Eden process, as we've called it, is the first instance of political playoffs run on blockchain software. So the EOS blockchain funded the development of this, and Dan put together a team and built this. It's beautiful software. Everybody who uses it enjoys the process of using it. And at the end of it, you arrive at a very transparent election product, right? Yeah, at the end of it, you can go back and audit it yourself. You can see who was in every room. You can see the recordings of every room. You can see if somebody made a promise to another person, and you can see everything that a person ran on as their platform. And it's extremely transparent. That's pretty much what defines the process. It's what defines everything on blockchain. And it's just it's a fantastic process. So we just ran the second election two Saturdays ago, and there's a new set of delegates and chief delegates, and we have a new mandate to do what we want to do with the budget that has been given to us because we've been elected to positions. So like I said, it's a test. It's an experiment. It's a social experiment. But we've been given this really, really beautiful code, a really, really clean user experience. And now the people in Eden need to sort out a way to maximize this. And in my opinion, we need to share it with the world. Dan's team is working on another thing right now that's going to hopefully share this process with the world. But the Eden process as it is right now, I contend, is very valuable, and it's something that we should be sharing in as many ways as we possibly can.
Yeah, so. And like you pointed out in your proposal, I'll bring it up here in a second. But like you pointed out, it's good. It's not perfect yet. Eden for me is interesting because it's almost polar opposite of the Platonic ideal. Of how government and politics should work. And if you're familiar with like the Republic or Plato's Republic, basically he structures the city-state as a place whereby politicians are essentially, they're like the priests of the political realm, right? Like the shamans where they actually don't get paid. There is no money involved in politics. But what happens with Eden is it actually kind of becomes a vehicle for funding a lot of ways, right? Like you wouldn't have to use it like that. Like you could use it in a high school for a sports league, and people could potentially come in and say, okay, well, you're going to represent our group, and this is what we've talked about over the course of the last 15 minutes, and we think that your idea is the best, so you can go forward. You could take money out of the equation, but I think what's happening right now with a lot of what's going on with Eden is keeping money and funding into that equation, right? Like getting development for the EOS ecosystem, which is really interesting. But you said it's not perfect, not yet. There are some problems with Eden. Now, that's not to say that it isn't valuable, right? Like there's problems with everything. If you think that there's no problems with something, then you're probably misinformed. You're in your own echo chamber because the most important things that were ever created, there's always problems, right? There's always going to be. We're humans, and there always has to be that aspect to it. So what are some of the issues? Like, not major issues. Again, we're not harping on Eden here, but what are some of the issues that you think, deserves attention in Eden, and how does the Pomelo grants proposal help us get to a place where we can better what is already a pretty decent system, but want to make it better?
In the same way that you wouldn't criticize a house that doesn't have a wall built yet. Like, you don't say that house isn't perfect. It's like, well, yeah, obviously that house isn't perfect. It's not finished yet, right? Like, that's the kind of not perfect I'm talking about in Eden. And it's there are many things that we can do to build this out. What we've been given is core software that needs some more development, some more human development behind it. It needs some time to mature. That's the big thing. Is the process itself is so nice, and so much data, I guess, can be drawn from it when it's used. When the process is run, we're going to learn about each other better. We're going to learn about the potential for the system. We're going to learn about how to talk to each other in terms of getting elected, like getting each other to elect. How do you talk to somebody? It's like, okay, everybody in this room, let's divide up the pot, and just elect me. And it's like, well, no, that doesn't make any sense, right? but if you're looking for somebody who can speak for the whole room, anyway, there's a bunch of different ways that we can think about attacking this system, like using this system as to select people. And one pardon me, one of the ways it was presented to us as a community last year when Dan was introducing it to us was, look, the EOS has no way to fund small projects. So why don't we, elect people who can then choose how to fund projects? They can just be given a budget. And he said a big budget. Like, these people are going to be given a big budget, and they're going to go around and look for worthwhile causes, and they're just going to fund them, right? And it, that role is like a project manager / philanthropist role, maybe, but then it gets sort of blended into when we started running the elections. People had individual discrete projects that they wanted to accomplish. So then it turns into, I've got a project that needs funding, and we can make it happen for this amount of money. And the Power Up interface that John Heater created was a fantastic example of it. He said, with a certain amount of EOS funding, I can execute this project. And he did it. And it was fantastic. And it tied off nicely. And now he's got something that he can expand upon using other means, right? But back then, this was the only funding option, right? Now there's funding options all over the place in EOS. And it's all coming from the same place. It's all coming from the network itself, right? But there's so many different ways to attack the process of getting funding. So there's a discussion within Eden of what is the role of an elected person? Like, what are they there to promote their own project, spend the money on their own project? Are they there to be a project manager and run their own project, or run a series of projects and fund a series of projects? Are they there to just become a worker for Eden and for EOS and just take that as a wage, essentially? Are they there to be like a political leader to lead this organization, or to help in a certain aspect of this organization? It's all very gray right now, right? We haven't really decided on that as a community. So the thing that the thing that I ran on was this pitch. We need to take this this core Eden concept and just make it available to the world, right? And it's open source software. We can take it, and it's not just open source software. It's open source software produced by some of the best EOS IO developers in existence, right? That this is this is in many ways like the prototype of how to design a piece of software properly, a smart contract platform properly, right? So in many ways, this is something that developers can look at and try to emulate. We can try to copy this and do something with it using the start off point that they've given us. So our goal, Dominic Thomas and myself, we were talking for a long time about the need to run our process more often, right? We had one election October 9th, and then we had another election April 9th. That's a 6-month gap of only running this software once, right? It was run a few times in tests and all that, but really it was only run in public once. And it was 6 months of wasted time, in the sense that we could have been running this process more and more often. More people could have learned about the back end of it. More of the developers within Eden could have learned about the back end of it. More people within Eden could have helped facilitate the process itself. There's all sorts of things that we could have done, but for a number of reasons, we were sort of just stuck because we didn't know what the development roadmap looked like for it, right? So we didn't know if it was going to get. Anyway, it doesn't even matter why we stopped and why we sort of had to halt. The fact is that we now have this really beautiful software that we can either abandon or we can try to use it, right? And we're thinking that it's way better to try to use it and to try to build it into something else. So Eden itself, I believe we've come to the consensus that we're going to take this software and we're going to build it out to the future. So the Eden organization is going to be using this and we're going to keep at it, right? Regardless of what Eden does, for Eden proper, I think that this should become an app, right? I think that the Eden process itself should be isolated, and some of the stuff that's very particular to the Eden community, such as our onboarding process and the way that the funds are dispersed, the treasury part of it, that doesn't have to be included in a stripped down version of an app that can be accessible to anybody. So what our goal is to strip off a lot of those features or just not enable them. Or I'm not a developer. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, right? All I know is the UX, right? All I know is what the user is going to experience. So what we want to do is be able to any EOS account holder could come to this DApp and initiate an election process where they'd be basically the owner of the election. They could throw a list of EOS addresses at it, say, like round number 128 EOS addresses and EOS account names, and those people are going to be invited to take part in the election, right? Down the road, it could be email addresses, it could be Twitter handles, it could be all sorts of different ways that we get people into this, but that's irrelevant for the big picture. The big picture is we want to be able to have an election owner who can initiate an election process with their own parameters, so they can have a payout of such and such. They can have as many rounds as they want. They could have the number of people in each round, and they'd be able to tailor this process for whatever they wanted, right? And one of the things that they could use it for would be just as we use it right now. We're a DAC, we're a decentralized community, and we use it to elect leaders within the community right now, or people with the best projects, or whatever you want to say. We're electing individuals right now. But if this DApp was stripped down, we could use it. It's basically now a playoff tree, an on-chain playoff tree that we can use for all sorts of different purposes. And one of those would be for contests. One of those might be for electing committees within Eden even, right? It could be for any DApp out there or any DAC that wanted to run an election, but they can't right now because they're stuck on Ethereum, and their transactions might cost too much, or they might take too long. And this, transactions in this particular system can be done in a second, and they're responsive in a second, right? And we can, there are any number of reasons why people might want to use this, but if for a DAC, right? But again, one of the things that I've really, really desperately wanted to try is to run it to craft a conversation. So if you get people running with ideas, so you ask at the very beginning of the thing, of the discussion period, it comes out with a question, and it's like, what went wrong, or what is the mission of such and such, or what's the best country in the world to live in, and then you get people divided up into countries, into tables, and they discuss this, right? And then the person from, say you have 5 people at a table, and the person who can best articulate their position goes through to the next round. And then again, it gets distilled even further. The next round goes up and up and up. So at the end of it, you end up with a final table. Again, just like in poker, they're the best players usually at the final table, right? They're not just the luckiest. They're the luckiest and the best. It's a mixture of the luckiest and the best players, right? But if you run this process more and more and more often, you're going to end up with the people who are lucky enough to be the best, right? And when you're using this to isolate a discussion, you can end up with a final table of 5 or 6 people who have defended their position really well, and they've also listened to everybody who was at the tables with them, and they've incorporated some of those discussions, and you can come to a final discussion that makes a lot of sense and is really, really articulated well. And then you could just tie a bow on it, put it on YouTube, and there you go. There's your position statement from the organization that held this election event, right? It's in Eden, we're talking about bylaws right now. We're talking about ways that we can improve our current system. And what if we ran an election process and everybody had the instruction: you are to choose one new bylaw to defend, one new idea for one bylaw, and you're going to defend that. And then it goes to their rounds, and everybody can hear these ideas for bylaws that are good for Eden, and every room is going to nominate the best idea from that room that's the best for Eden. And by the end of it, you're going to end up with a final table of people who have the best ideas for the best bylaws. And then those are the bylaws that we might be able to talk about at the chief delegate level, because right now we've got 5 or 6 chief delegates who are talking amongst themselves their own ideas for bylaw additions, right? But this would be a way to poll the entire community for bylaw additions, right? This is a brainstorming and refining process all in one event, and the event can take 3 hours, right? At the end of it, you can have a really good discussion with a really good final document, even that takes 3 hours to produce, or 4 hours to produce, however long it takes. But it takes an afternoon.
I think you bring up a couple of really interesting points for me. First of all, primarily, definitely one of the restrictions for blockchain is people getting an account and getting money in. Right? I had an interview with somebody yesterday who was talking about Pomelo and the problems with it, in relation to not necessarily Pomelo, but people who are trying to launch businesses on EOS and get non-crypto people in, right? And so this is like really problematic, because just to fund their proposal on Pomelo, they had to get people to go to places like Coinbase and get EOS and buy it, and those transactions weren't working. And so you got to jump through all of these hoops, right? And so the thing that I like about what you guys are doing is you're kind of looking at a plug and play app that could potentially even, be, I mean, it's even possible now if you send people to Wombat, for example, right, and they download a free EOS account that you could log in with, which is like a social login, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, like your normal, internet stuff that everyone does anyway, right? When they log into a site. But then you plug and play that into an app, and that app could be used for, something serious like funding mechanisms on the EOS blockchain, or it could be used for, like Dr. Wu pointed out, in a university, just as an experiment for consensus. And the point about being on the blockchain is it's on the blockchain so that it's transparent, right? Now, I remember that first took part in that first election. And there were some difficulties, and a lot of them got, solved with the kind of team over at Clarion and the new stuff that they built. But it's still problematic, right? Like, you still had, I wasn't a part of the last election, but I heard it about it. You still had people who weren't showing up, right? You still had, some issues. And you still needed to actually, register for an EOS account and pre-register for all of that stuff. So I think the value of a plug and play option is pretty phenomenal, right? And I was talking to a friend of mine in the real world about voting. And it's funny because I don't really vote in Japan. I don't have the ability to do that. And like, his family votes, but he said it's amazing because like voting in Japan is amazing. I'm like, I didn't even know that people voted here. Like, I thought we had like one of the lowest voter counts in the world. And he's like, no, he's like, if you look at America, what's happening in America, right? And like, this guy's British too, by the way. But if you look at America and what's happening in America, the foundational place for democracy, it's an absolute shit show, right? Like let's take what happens in Japan, right? And this is really interesting to me. What happens in Japan is the elections happen on a Sunday. They happen at every single school. People can walk in, show their ID, vote, and walk out. Nobody has to take the day off work. Nobody has to be picked up by a Trump bus and driven to the polling station so they won't vote, right? And so it's really interesting how that plays a role. Now, the same could be said with Eden as it exists now. Again, I'm not knocking it, but there is a pretty big leap that you have to, take to even get into the process to be able to do it, right? And so the people who are using it now are people who are interested in, EOS and interested in seeing the governance, right? But that's a very small group of people that could potentially be using it, that could come from other blockchains, that could come from even the non-blockchain space. But in order to do that, it's the same as like EOS back in the day. You need a plug and play option. And it sounds to me like that's kind of your main goal for the development of this, is to build something that anyone can use, regardless of their understanding of EOS, regardless of their understanding of technology, regarding of their understanding of blockchain. Is that like maybe the correct assumption? I think you're muted there, Chuck. Sorry, you're like,
sorry, my kid came in the door.
Yeah, that's all right.
No, yeah, absolutely. It's fun to run this software, right? It was fun to participate in this process, and it was just enjoyable. It was, and I find great joy in interacting with a well-made smart contract, right? When you can see stuff happening on chain and you just done it, and you're getting feedback in the real world, and the blend of everything together that Eden gives you is very fulfilling. As I said in the election open call on the 9th there, like this is the culmination of the internet experience for us. This is like everything is all just coming together, and this is, I guess, this is the first true Web3 thing that we're talking about, right? Of it, you got your real life stuff blending with the blockchain, blending with video, and blending with everything, and it's all coming together in one finished app. And that's what we've experienced, but it's still very difficult to make that happen for people. If it could be an app that was simple and straightforward to use, this process would be used everywhere. And the name, my goal is to make Eden Election become as ubiquitous as the word Kleenex, right? It's like, how do you guys arrive at this? And I'm like, well, we have an Eden Election, and then we, and it's like, yeah, oh, I know what you're talking about. That would be a beautiful thing, right? And it just makes sense to use this process as many ways as we can to try to just hone it and get it down to the point where we know exactly what we need to fix. Like right now, we're grasping at bylaw changes, and we don't really have a handle on what needs to fit, what needs to happen, because we just haven't run the process enough. We need to run the process over and over and over again so that we know what kind of laws we need to set up to take care of certain situations that might come up. We can't even imagine the situations that can come up because we haven't run it enough. Right. And the more that we run it, the more we're going to find out about the technology itself and the process, and the more we're going to be able to guide it into something that's more beautiful than it is right now.
Yeah, I like it. So definitely go. I'm actually gonna have to cut you off because we're gonna do another pitch deck in a few minutes with another project with Hyperion. So if you're around and you want to check that one out too, but definitely go and check. I put the proposal in the notes below, and the proposal is also in the comments to the side. I'm interested to hear more about Eden personally. I'll talk to you after the show, but I want people to understand that the value add for this is a really low lift, because what it allows is something to actually be built that can be used. And I think, the whole thing with Pomelo is we want to, support projects that are offering a public good. And what greater public good is it than being a part of governance and having a say in how certain things are operated. And I think, honestly, the biggest problem with blockchain is getting people into it.
Yeah.
Right. And we always say that EOS is great because, it's easy and it's a easy programming language. But honestly, I'm just going to say it, from back in the early days, EOS was one of the worst in terms of onboarding people, right? The concept of, having, to stake CPU was a great idea, right? When you're looking at environments and mining and potential, harm and difficulty, and, even other, business scenarios that might not be so, because it kind of blocks people in, right? But I won't go into that. But the problem with Pomelo, the problem with EOS was that there was no plug and play options.
Yeah.
And so
it's a good thing to talk about.
Yeah.
We can talk about how nice it is, but you use it? Nope.
Right. And what better of a more necessary of a plug and play option do you need then for governance, right? If you have a democracy that is all under house arrest,
that's it. Yeah.
Right. Then what are you really progressing forward? So definitely go check it out. Like I said, we'll be back for another pitch deck in a couple minutes, actually, in another project. But thanks for joining us, Chuck. Please stay on the line. I want to talk to you for a couple minutes off air. But definitely go check out the proposal. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.